Cool. How's it, guys? Welcome back to the Matt Brown Show. We have lots of movement in the studio today. But today, more importantly, I'm joined by the incredibly smart and intelligent Bronwyn Williams. Round of applause, please. Bronwyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Pleasure's all ours. So today we're going to talk about all things evil.
Correct. Yes.
When I connected with you, when was it? Earlier this week? Last week?
We tried several times.
Yeah.
Finally yesterday.
So we're like, what are we going to talk about? And then, so you kind of just floated some really awesome stuff to me, and we're going to explore this at length. And I think this is such a rad conversation to be having, really involving, and you can jump in where I fucked this up. But basically, it's it's about ethics, really, and we're looking at globally at how big companies are kind of behaving in order to grow, capture new market share into new markets like China and stuff like that. But before we get into the meat and the potatoes,
yes.
What's the headline backstory for you? Like, what do you want our audience to know?
To know about me? Well, I'm technically a futurist and a trained analyst right now, but I have been in the past everything from a lingerie store madam to a part-time singer.
A what? A madam in a lingerie?
Yeah,
is that what
I owned a lingerie store, and we also used to do a little bit of light pimping of burlesque dancers.
No. I'm visual. Explain that to me. How does that look? Light pimping of, just hold the mic a bit closer.
Yes, well, I had a lingerie store. We supported South African local lingerie designers, so it was quite nice. It was at 44 Stanley, but we also used to have burlesque classes in the afternoons for bachelorette parties, and you could hire burlesque dancers through our store if you wanted to have something interesting for your corporate party.
Are you still doing that?
No, I'm afraid not.
Okay, I was going to say, how does a futurist do that, and then also
that was just more of a hobby than anything else. In the meantime, I had a real job working in marketing, and I've been working with Dion Chang with Flux Trends since 2011, which is really what I've been doing with my life.
Wow. Okay. So how is Flux Trends doing?
It's doing great. We're growing fantastically, and we're going international this year. So
really?
That's great. Yes.
We'll see you there.
Correct.
But what do you look at? I mean, we're going to talk about this whole thing about, as I set up earlier, but what are you looking at? I mean, futurists, I've heard people say, like, futurists they ask more questions than they have any answers. If you have nothing interesting to say, become a futurist. There's loads of trained specialists out there. What makes you different?
Okay, well, from Flux's perspective, what we do is we look at the intersection of consumer and tech trends, but then we pull out actionable insights from that. So our work is very much predominantly working with corporates who want to know what's going on with their consumers, want to know what technologies they could take advantage of, but they're actually looking for, okay, what's next? So what and what now? And that's where we come in and do that. And in terms of being a futurist, if you're trying to predict the future, then you should really be writing fiction. But more what we do is look at how to actually create the future that you want, because someone's going to create it. If you're not building the future, if you're not putting those steps in place, someone else is doing it. So it's for the people who want to design the future rather than just be swept away by someone else's vision thereof.
As they say, the best way to predict the future is to create it, right?
Absolutely.
Is that one of your quotes, or?
No, sorry, I didn't come up with that myself.
Okay, damn. You should have just said yes for today. Absolutely. Cool. So let's talk about this whole dinner plate of ethics and business. Why don't you set us up? What's the headline there? When we say don't be evil, what exactly is this all about? Give us some context.
Well, when I say don't be evil, I'm talking to brands and businesses who have power and are starting to use digital technology to track and extract more value from their consumers. There is a line that you can cross into what I call evil territory. And what this basically comes down to is that with great data comes great responsibility. It's a quote from the whole comic book industry.
Google Images has some amazing quotes.
It really does. But I came up with that one all by myself.
Did you really?
Yes.
Wow. Just create an image of it. Let's put it out. Instagram. Okay, cool. So can you give us some practical examples, kind of dumb it down for us? Because I think, there's a lot of people, and you say the word ethics, their eyes glaze over and they go, fuck sakes, I'm going to listen. Any company that's motivated by profit by nature won't exactly be ethical, unless you're in social entrepreneurship. I'm not saying in all cases, but any big company with shareholders is motivated by profit. So then, at any point, Google, for instance, and you can jump in here, Google entering the China market, what exactly happened there? So it's just an example of how ethics starts to be, what's the word? Compromise, that's it, yeah.
For the profit motive. And I have absolutely no problem with companies making a profit. I'm an unpopular free market libertarian. So, judge me for that as you will. But the point of the matter is that if you start going after these sort of low-lying fruits and compromising your values and your ethics, you're going to come up against your own consumer, because the consumer will only take being abused so much before they're going to switch over to someone else, especially in a Western free market society, which is a nice place to live. Unfortunately, for people who live in more totalitarian regimes, like China, for example, which is literally ruled by a one-party state government that has pretty much absolute control over their population, that becomes much more of a problem. And the Google example is quite interesting, because quite a lot of people know that for a very long time, as part of their code of conduct, that little 3-word phrase, "don't be evil," was in there, which is kind of quite cute. Yeah. But a year ago, April last year, I think it was, they subtly took that out. They didn't tell anyone about it, and they replaced it with the Alphabet code of conduct, which just says that the company is going to try not to break the law, which is quite different to not being evil.
Yeah, no promises. We'll just try.
Yes.
But that's interesting, right? Because they used that particular manifesto, "don't be evil," and those words they hung their hat on when they listed for the first time.
Correct.
And it's been part of their incredible growth and global domination of search, and then everything else that they're doing as a result. And now with the founding of Alphabet and in pursuit of a massive consumer market, which, how big is China now?
I don't even know. Massive.
Just have a look.
Google that.
Google that shit.
Google. Bigger than
we're
South
using
Africa.
Google to figure out, anyway. So, but it illustrates the point, that in order to go after a bigger piece of a very competitive pie, China being largely closed, to your point, being controlled one-party states, etc. There you go. What is that? 1.36 billion people. Okay,
that's a lot.
That's a lot of people, right?
That's a tasty market if you can get your claws.
That's like 20% of the planet Earth. So yeah, it makes sense. But then wasn't there Revlon was another one, I think, that also did some questionable stuff?
Yeah, Revlon is more of an example you can use to what happens when you sort of start to compromise on your values. So what they did is, what we're finding is, to get into markets like China, they insist upon vivisection. That's testing on live animals to get your beauty products listed or imported into those markets. Now, brands like Revlon and MAC in their home markets say, we absolutely are against that. We're a cruelty-free brand, and they market that very heavily. But behind the door, they're actually engaging in these practices in order to get the import license into countries that insist upon that in order to get into that market. And you could have got away with that in the 1950s and the 1960s, but with the internet as it is now, and with the fact that younger consumers are more and more concerned about ethical issues regarding nature, the environment, animals, and just genuinely not being a dick,
There's always that.
Yes. You're going to start finding that those brands are now under a lot of pressure. Beauty bloggers, even the innocent little Instagram influencers, are saying we're boycotting those brands. We're either going to use, brands that are completely cruelty-free, that actually are cruelty-free, not just in their own home markets, but refuse to cross that ethical line in order to go after that low-lying fruit. So my message to companies is, yeah, you can be evil and you don't have to be ethical. You absolutely can be like a heartless capitalist and absolutely give the American Democrats something to talk about.
But I thought you liked the free market.
But the point of the matter is, being ethical is actually within your own best interest, for your own bottom line, in a world where all information is available pretty much to anyone. You can be doxxed at a drop of a hat very easily as a brand for trying to be unethical around the corner. That's something that you need to consider for yourself. Be ethical to make money, not just be ethical to be nice.
Yeah, that's a great point. Going back to the Revlon examples, you're saying that if you are a beauty company, right, and you want to get an import license into China, you have to animal test.
Yeah, otherwise you will not be able to sell your product in that territory.
But so how's that fucking on any fucking planet? I'm swearing a lot now, but it irritates me because I hate that shit.
No,
everybody hates that shit. So
it's
you say, but why is
terrible.
it mandatory? Surely it should be optional.
Well, it is optional. If you don't do it, you can't sell in that country.
That's beyond me.
That's the thing about going into a totalitarian market. And that comes directly back to what we're talking about with Google. So shortly after they took that 3-letter-word phrase, don't be evil, out of their code of conduct, they have agreed to open Google up in China now. But that means that they have to play by the Chinese government rules, which includes censorship of the internet, just like our friends to the north of us now are being censored in the internet in Zimbabwe. And it also means that as a digital services provider to the Chinese government, because effectively that's their one customer in that market, they're going to start sharing user data with that Chinese government, who is using people's data for some rather interesting means at the moment.
What are some of those means? I mean, what have you observed there?
Well, the big thing that's going on in China right now is they're setting up the social credit score system. If you watch Black Mirror and you've seen the nosedive episode, that's exactly what they've been doing. Black Mirror is based on existing technology. And the social credit score technology is literally controlling every aspect of people's lives. It's in the beta testing phase at the moment, but they're saying by about 2022, 2025, it's hard to get accurate information out of China. The system is going to be mandatory across the country for every single Chinese citizen. And there's no way to escape from it. The Chinese government has data on people's facial recognition, on all their online purchases, your entire online history, because once again, all internet goes through the government, and now Google's going to be sharing that data with them too. They even have banks of people's voice recognition and databases on how you walk, gait recognition databases. In other words, even if you put a paper bag over your head to avoid the facial recognition tech, they still know who you are when you're trying to walk around on the street. So what they're doing is they're collecting all this data and then they're grading everybody and giving you a credit score. Just like you get a credit score for your financial history, whether you're in a bit of debt or not, they're including that financial information in the score. The score is a total outlook of how good a citizen you are in the eyes of the Chinese government. And this score is already determining your access to all sorts of things in that country. Everything from where you can live, where you can go to school, even who you can marry is limited by this number. So,
and your children.
Back to the Black Mirror episode. Yeah. And the most scary thing, though, is the access to movement and the access to jobs. So if your score is low enough, you're actually trapped in the country. You can't use public transport. You can't get on a plane. And there's been academics in China who have spoken out against the government, who have had their scores lowered to the point that they're effectively under house arrest in the country. It's like wearing an ankle monitor without wearing an ankle monitor, because they know where you are at any given moment in time.
That's scary.
That's not exactly not evil, Google.
Yeah, but do you think Google's doing this sort of, we're going to, I wouldn't say partner or get in bed with, but work with the Chinese government to maybe control policy in any way?
Well, of course.
Not that they could, but I'm saying they are Google.
Market. So of course you want. That's so tempting. That is so tempting to go after that and just say it's not our fault. We're only doing it because we have to. Just like Revlon or MAC saying it's not our fault. We don't want to, cut open live doggies, but we have to if we want to sell there.
Wow.
So it's a problem. So that's the sort of line. When you cross that, sure, you can go after that low-lying fruit and access that massive Chinese market, but I'm not sure your consumers back home, when they start to understand what's really going on there, are going to be so keen on that.
But they don't care. I'm in America, man. China's over there. China's bad and evil, and whatever happens over there doesn't affect me. So why should I care?
But it is. I mean, if you live in the EU, I think the EU is probably 5 minutes behind China in terms of their facial recognition databases and their continuing censorship of the internet. Their copyright directive coming out within the next few months is quite something when it comes to censorship of the internet.
I want to come back to that. But the average person in America doesn't give a fuck. They don't, because they only care what affects them. If Google wants to go and play over in a 1.3 billion size consumer market and basically, be evil, whatever word you want to use, but the consumer in America doesn't care. I'm in South Africa, I don't care. Unless China comes in here and literally buys the government, or something major and significant happens, or if China buys up all the gold reserves of the US Federal Reserve, which from my understanding is actually what's happening or has happened. So they actually own the banks essentially should the currency deflate to a point where it's worthless. A hypothetical situation.
Totally hypothetical.
And we happen to go back to the gold standard and be like, hey, China, can you get my gold back? But I mean, like, that's a scary scenario, right? So, and China is a global power, like beyond what America is right now. That's the fact. The other thing I heard China was doing, I saw this on Last Week Tonight by John Oliver. What's that program that they're implementing? It's like a global play to literally control all privatized companies or something like that. It's like, I don't know whether you saw that. Just get it up. Just Google China on Last Week Tonight. But it's like they have a global policy of positioning China
global
as
colonization,
yeah. It's like, we are going to be number one, and that is that.
It's nice what you can do with central planning, right?
Yeah, well, it's scary as hell, man.
But you just write it down and there it is.
But it's like, people don't see that stuff happening. I mean, there was another one documentary I watched where there was an investment bank just after the financial collapse of 2008 in America. I forget the name now. But all they did, basically, you had all your existing investments were shite. Okay, the property market collapsed, and all the assets kind of like fell through the floor. And then the banks went, well, where can we go? And the only market that was booming at the time, 2008, 2009, was China. So they went to China and they said, hey guys, what we're going to do is we're going to list your companies on US as US securities. And so they started listing these things. I mean, this bank was making like billions, okay, in the process of listing these securities and making these securities available for local US investors. But what transpired was that these securities, these companies were shit. They had no value. Like, in other words, if you were turning over $10 million, the equivalent in yen, you listed at 100. If you're turning over 100, you listed as $1 billion valued company. Did you hear about this story? And then they listed all this stuff. And again, it was like this whole kind of like the same narrative that happens out of like these big financial institutions, where they will do anything in the pursuit of profit. And this is the ethical thing again, right? Whether you're Google or whether you're a financial company or whatever. And people lost it. I think it was 1.5. No, it was actually bigger. It's like $30 billion was lost by listing bullshit companies, Chinese companies on US exchanges.
Yeah. I mean, we do that here in South Africa too. We got a few interesting ones that are listed currently.
Yeah. What's this, Mev? China State Group, was it? China State Group's gobble up struggling private companies. Yeah, well, there you go. But it's part of like a global thing. I mean, what's that massive investment company, Chinese-based?
Alibaba.
No. Alibaba, I think, was backed by. But again, Alibaba.
It's all backed by the government.
Yeah. Well, but there's question marks over the viability of Alibaba actually.
Yeah, it's all backed by the Chinese taxpayer, basically. All those Chinese billionaires are not actually privately owned companies as much as they are run by businessmen. The Chinese Communist Party has this philosophy that people weren't getting rich quick enough under communism, so they now have this, we will allow some people to get rich first and the rest of you must wait your turn. So they've sort of like funded these few billionaires around the spot to keep the aspiration sort of going. It is a bit of a pyramid if you look at the money that's going into it, how long they can keep up those growth paths through central planning, we don't know, but that's why the whole world's global economy is a little bit precarious at the moment. No one really knows what's going on.
Well, yeah, I mean, someone shared something about, there's a BBC, it was Benji Kutsia from NT Trips on LinkedIn the other day. It was like a World Health Organization or some global business was looking at all the social stress and tensions that are developing. You've got Brexit with the UK. You got Theresa May can't make a deal with, I mean, like just this week, there was like an overwhelm. It was the biggest landslide loss in a prime minister's policy being thrown out of essentially
And
the House of Commons. Yeah, she sucks at dancing. Fucking hell. But there's all these things happening. You got hyperinflation of economies. You got all these things happening, and you know, and the thing that's permeating all of this is greed.
Absolutely.
You know, and people pissed off. Like, you've got, I don't know, different ideologies. People saying you said free market. Some people don't believe in the free market. Some people say capitalism is bad, you know. Anyway, there's just lots of shit going out there on a global stage right now. And for me, it's like, well, what's the spark that's going to, I mean, you look at trends, but is there a spark or something that you feel is something that we should be looking out for as business owners and just people?
Well, as the spark, it's more of a macro trend. So I'll be tracking at Flux Trends is more this Generation Z, or we call them Generation Protest, and they just like refusing to deal with
what
all
is
of this.
That? Sorry.
So Generation Z is really the group of people in South Africa we'd call a born-free generation. So you sort of you're young,
so
you're older teenagers,
internet.
younger 20s. Yeah, they were born with the internet already working, not like us.
You guys are born frees, people.
born with the internet connected already. Yeah, but they're highly political, this generation, which is quite interesting.
Are you really?
Look at the Fees Must Fall movements and look at that, all those like protests in the US. I mean, there's like identity politics everywhere. Everyone belongs to some identity politics group, and you're proud and you wear those sort of like flags on your sleeve. But what's also interesting about this generation is that unlike millennials, who also care about social issues and don't like animal testing and all that, this generation is a lot more self-sufficient. It's back to being sort of more independent and less collective, which is interesting. And that's to do with the fact that their parents were the latchkey yuppies of the 1980s. They had less kids than the boomers had, So this generation is more independent and they're very self-directed. And they are looking at even things like jobs. It's not a case of looking for a job if you look in the US. South Africa is a different context. I don't want to confuse that issue at all. But it's like, I don't need a job. I'm already making money from my YouTube channel. I mean, he was the guy that made the most money on YouTube last year? It was a kid that unboxed
Ryan
presents. Some rich brat that unwrapped his presents now makes more money than all of us in this room.
Ryan's toy review.
Yeah.
He's a American, like Filipino dude family, and I think he made like $9 million. Just
opening his own toys.
Yeah, on YouTube. I won't actually let my son watch that shit because it's so bad. Yeah. It's like I don't know what that does to kids.
But
long term.
That's an extreme example. But the point is, you don't need a job anymore in order to make money. And this is something that the big greedy corporations going after fast, low-lying fruit are going to find out. So basically, there's two ways that could really collapse this whole internet monopoly of these giant, the FONGs, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, the FONGs, those guys, that could see their demise. The one would be the case that socialists get into power in the West, which is actually a trend that's probably going to happen because we're seeing this factionalization and this spread of the Overton window, like the socially acceptable window is really shrinking, and you got much more political extremes on both sides, right wing, alt-right, left wing. You got your socialists that are gaining ground. And if the sort of the pendulum swings back to the socialist space, we're going to see things like universal basic income that'll come on board. And the only way to fund a universal basic income type system is through a totalitarian regime like what China has, which is through more control of literally every aspect of your life, because you really have to choose. Do you want free stuff or do you want freedom? That's really that's always been the choice when it comes to politics. Pick one. You're never going to have both. And if it goes to that route, these companies like your giant monopolies won't be able to have enough consumers to fund their growth, if that makes sense. That'll all have to be nationalized. That won't survive. That's the one extreme.
Yeah. Is there another one?
Yeah. On the other hand, is if you get like your right-wing governments get into control and they go big on freedom of economy but low on freedom of social interchanges, then what we could see is these companies could grow very fast and then crash. What do they call it? Like a Darwinian event where something scales beyond its scale size, because growth can't be perpetual. Growth always has some sort of self-limiting factors. Just like if you put bacteria into a jar, it grows and grows and grows, and then suddenly the colony collapses when it runs out of those resources.
Unless you Elon Musk with that, then you'll put it on Mars.
Yeah, that could happen. Well, they actually are growing fruit flies on the moon now. China's doing that.
Oh, on the dark side.
How exciting, yeah.
What are they doing on the back side of the moon there?
No one really knows, but they're growing stuff. They're like, we have aliens now.
No one really knows. Aliens. That sounds like a conspiracy theory to me,
man. Well, they didn't even really announce the fact that they landed there. It wasn't like big
they did. It was on the news.
It was like a little bit. It wasn't like huge. People weren't like, oh yeah, we're back on the moon. But they've been growing stuff. They've been growing fruit flies and cotton seeds. So we have actual lunar aliens.
But it's interesting that they landed on the dark side of the moon.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Think about that, right? So like, you can't see it. You can't see it.
No one
you
can
can't
check up on that.
There's
no one else is there.
There's no elevator there. Yeah, there you go. China's first plant. Oh fuck, they did do it. Plant to grow on the moon is already dead. Try again, but that's insane. Yeah, I know. That's very interesting here.
Space race is fun. That's a fun.
It is interesting, right? But I want to go back to this UBI thing. But the precursor to that is that there's a financial collapse, right? There has to be.
Not necessarily at all. I suspect that the whole UBI system will cause a financial collapse, but there doesn't have to be a financial collapse in order for that to happen. All that has to happen is that the narrative has to create enough fear among the working class. And by the working class, I mean anyone that has a job and a salary. That doesn't mean that you're poor. That means that you are paid a paycheck. That there's enough fear and panic put into place that people are saying robots are going to take your jobs. If enough people believe that narrative, and let's face it, they believe Donald Trump, so anything is possible in this world, they could vote for a socialist government that says, great, we're going to fund a universal basic income, which means everybody's taxes get jacked up by 40% and everyone gets paid a living wage. Sounds great on paper, but the economic incentives and the perverse incentives that come into play when such a system kicks into gear on a large scale are... let us say unexplored.
Yeah. Well, do you think, I mean, how would it be funded? Because universal basic income, if you've got 7 billion people on the planet who need, I don't know, just Google what's the minimum amount for someone to survive. I mean, it depends where you are, right? So, but like a UBI would need to be it would need to be a living wage that would address the mean. And the mean, in terms of like living expenses and stuff like that, wouldn't exactly cover America or let's say Sweden.
No, not that lifestyle.
Versus India. Do you know what I mean? So,
well, yeah. That's always the conflict between a universal basic income or any sort of welfare state, is that you have to have closed borders with that. Otherwise, it becomes like a one-way slope where all the people who don't have money flow towards the money. If you've got borders, but that's not great.
So you're saying
then you can actually do this sort of thing. In a country like America, they've done the sums, and if they do jack up that top tax bracket to 70% on the marginal dollars that you're earning, they could technically fund it, but I don't know how long they'd be able to fund it for if they keep on letting immigrants in. Then that becomes an issue because you're feeding more and more mouths with less and less. It becomes like biblical parables, trying to feed everybody with 5 fish. Yeah. In South Africa, I did the calculations. If we took our entire GDP and spent nothing other than on UBI, everyone in this country would get, I think, just under 5,000 Rand a year. So that's not really going to happen, guys. We might really want it, but practically, I'm not so sure about that.
But what would happen? I mean, let's open this up. If you were guaranteed 5,000 Rand a month, what would you do?
Or a year.
A year, you mean?
Yeah, in South Africa, if we took our entire GDP divided by the number of people we have, we get 5 grand a year. I don't think many people are going to be keen on that idea.
Okay, so if it was even a month, somehow we get there. What would you do? Would you work? What would you aspire to do more, be more? What would you do? Chris?
Well, I suppose I'd work because it's like you kind of getting robbed of that experience. You know what I mean? It's kind of like someone else is making that decision for you, and you're limited in what you can achieve in your career because you've got a paycheck. So a lot of people will just be like, cool, well, peace, I'm not going to do anything because what's the point?
Yeah, you're always going to have those mongrels, right, at the bottom. Yeah.
Well, look at the UK. I mean, they've had their dole system for ages, and some people are quite happy to live with that sort of low level of income, but it's enough to get by on, and other people are not. Other people are more ambitious. But what you find with those sort of large scale systems, you get that attrition. There's always the person on the margin whose job pays only that much more than what the baseline is, and he's like, why should I work, get up every morning just to supplement my basic income with an extra 5 grand? It's not worth it for me. I'm going to rather stay home because I can use that time better. And as soon as that guy stops working, his taxes also disappear, and the next guy up the rung on the next margin feels the pressure and says, it's not fair, my taxes have gone up that much, it doesn't make sense for me. And you get that sort of marginal attrition on the fringes. So proponents of the system are saying, oh no, it's fine, everyone will pull their weight. But I thought Lenin was quite keen on that idea too. It won't really work out in the long run.
So let's do quote of the day. Cool. So this one, you can walk us through this. What does it say?
It says, with great data comes great responsibility. But don't trust me, because I wasn't responsible enough to fit the word responsibility onto the board.
Okay. So with great data comes great responsibility. Yeah,
and this is really a challenge to marketers and to businesses that are collecting data on their consumers. I'm looking at you, Discovery, your behavioral bank that you're bringing out right now. And the fact is that with technology, it is really smart. Machine learning is very clever, and it really can be used to manipulate consumer behavior. We can design very addictive video games and social media platforms, and we can put incentives and perverse incentives in place in order to tweak people's behavior, just like Discovery does with Vitality. You wear your ankle monitor to the gym, and then you get your points, and if you don't, you don't.
You can get this Apple smartwatch for free. Just tell us where you are at all times.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's great power, and you can use that power for good or for not so good. And in the short run, it's very attractive to use it for not so good, and to just pull that ring out and extract as much value as you can from that consumer. But if you do that, those consumers are going to vote for a universal basic income, and then the capitalist utopian dream is going to be over, guys. So it's for your own sake. You need to limit your own scale to something that is sustainable for the market that you are working in. Hopefully you have a slightly longer term view of your
What do you mean by
company.
that practically? I mean, are you saying be selective around as a consumer, I will work with discovery, but I won't work with F&B in terms of providing data? Do you know what I mean? Like, let's just say F&B wanted to, there's this new cool fucking device, F&B phone thing, just killed iPhone, no problem, and everybody got one, and now you can start, there's an ecosystem around it, just like iTunes or whatever. Are you saying in that hypothetical scenario, as a consumer, we should be thinking, questioning, well, actually, do I want to work with Discovery Bank if they're going to, behavioral bank, fantastic, not the first in the world to go there, but if, should they be saying, well, no? And in other words, I guess what I'm trying to get to is consumers don't know who they can trust.
That's true.
And they get romanticized about the offer, which is, hey, get this Apple smartwatch, which I couldn't believe the price, by the way, Caleb. It was like fucking 10 grand almost. And the new ones, you know what I mean? Like, but for a friggin' watch to irritate you all day, you know what I mean?
You
Get a
used to need a court
Fitbit.
sentence to strap one of those on someone.
Dude, and they don't even look that good.
Now we
I prefer
pay you.
Fitbits. But I mean, like, yeah, are you wearing one? Yeah, okay, sorry about that. That's generation what? 3, 4. Okay. Ooh, see what I mean? Look at it. It's gross. But point being, like, how do you know who to trust?
We don't, and that is the problem, and that's the big issue in terms of ethics around this big tech and this big data, because these companies really are powerful, and they become scarily powerful when they start getting into beds with governments, where it becomes not an opt-in, where it becomes that you don't have a choice but to opt in. So with your Fitbits and with your Discovery Vitality, you're choosing to be part of that ecosystem. You might not have full informed consent, like you might not really know what you're signing up for or what privacy you're trading away for your free stuff. Once again, free stuff or freedom, there's always a choice. You've always got to pick your spots along the line. You can't have full of both. But it becomes really scary when those companies then start partnering with governments and getting into branded state scenarios like what's happening in China, where you can't opt out of these systems, where this is the default, it's not the opt-in. So it's up to consumers, up to individuals to start educating themselves. That informed consent word should be, hopefully in 2019, a very big buzzword. People need to start asking questions. I mean, we had a Me Too movement last year with the whole male and female dynamics. We kind of need, and that was all about consent. We should be screaming a whole lot louder about informed consent in the digital space. Like, what are we actually agreeing to? I mean, you could get apps now for your one night stand to guarantee that you actually concurred to that transaction. And that goes through the whole
deep.
informed consent thing. Yeah,
And very
that's another
personal.
trend. Yes, it's terrible, but that's the way we are now in our society. But when we are dotting all those I's and crossing all those T's for something as sort of superficial as that, we should really be considering this when it comes down to literally trading away our freedom for a slightly cheaper iPhone.
But there should be some kind of like protocol, some form of way to equally audit, measure, and report back to the consumer. Like if you're on Discovery, there's a little ticker thing, like a widget or something, like SSL. Basically, it's an SSL or it's a browser-based plugin or whatever that goes, this company is rated 4 out of 5 for these criteria, and these criteria are applied across all companies, etc., etc. Because the thing is, if you go to F&B or any major service provider where your lifestyle dictates or requires that you need to work with this company. I mean, this morning I was playing with my baby, and I was like, oh look, here's mom's wallet or whatever, and in that wallet was like probably 8 loyalty cards for 8 loyalty programs, right?
Oh, wow.
They know that's a fuck ton of data just for like my wife, right? And then I was thinking to myself, well, just this morning, funny enough, I was thinking, that's crazy. So like they've got all this data, but I can promise you of those 8 loyalty programs, and I'm not saying, and she's like the average, right? Imagine like proper shoppers. My wife's not bad in that space, by the way. Career shoppers. But I mean, like they've got to have what? Double that. And even in that case, like you're not exactly in the Edgar store going to read the terms and conditions, or if you're online, you're like, I've got 5 minutes to sign up for this account. I hate banks in general, so I just want to register as fast as possible. And it's like, do you agree to these terms and conditions? Amazon is another one. Every single online service provider has that massive scroll down. Do you accept these terms? Yes.
Yeah.
Or the best one, you get an email saying our terms and conditions have changed. Click here to find
agree.
out, and then it's like a 36-page online page. So it's like,
that's consent, but it's not informed consent.
well, this is my point. But what does that look like?
Well, we don't really know what that is now, but this is one of the big terms that we're seeing coming out of the tech ethics space right now. This whole thing about where does consent come in, and this sort of ties in with artificial intelligence. And as those sort of programs start dictating more and more of our lives, we have to start asking those questions. So companies have kind of been following the law, but they've been doing it in a way in order to trick you into signing on the dotted line. But lawmakers in places like the EU are really cracking down on this now. This whole thing that I'm talking about with them kind of censoring the internet a bit. It's got a lot to do with this whole informed consent thing too, and about the usage of data and data privacy laws. So data privacy laws are going to come onto the table. There's something that's going to be probably spoken about in 2019 and then sort of...
Are you talking about GDPR?
No, there's a new thing. It's called the EU Copyright Directive. I'd suggest you look it up. It's quite complicated.
Just have a look at it.
It's got quite a lot of parts to it.
Didn't even know about this.
But it's not GDPR. GDPR is more about data privacy itself. The Copyright Directive takes that a step further into basically blocking the internet. It's supposed to be done to protect content providers, like copyright law, which sounds great on paper. But if you actually look at it, this law actually says that you, as a blogger or as a user that tweets, like a regular Joe, will not be able to link to an article. In other words, you won't be able to post a link on your tweet to an article from a real publisher without that publisher's permission. So there's going to be so many more pop-ups.
That's the most messed up thing I've heard.
It's ridiculous. So technically you're copywriting stuff, but it gets more scary for small independent content producers. We've got things like you might come up with the best cat meme of January 2019 ever, and you don't have the resources or you don't think to copyright that, and then like some big news publishers like, that's a great meme, they publish that, they copyright that under the copyright directive, and then you won't be able to use your own meme because they've got the copyright. So it's pretty much a case of putting power back to big newspapers and big media publishers in an attempt to protect copyright in the notoriously uncopyrighted internet space. But there's a few other interesting parts to it.
Well, I mean, just go scroll off me. So it says, this is what Google says search will look like under EU copyright laws. Okay, scroll down, and then the first sentence, go down, and it's like, so basically last September, like last year, right?
Yeah.
So voted in favor of the copyright directive, a sweeping piece of legislation intended to update copyright for the internet age, but critics said it would fundamentally break the internet.
Yeah, literally, like no links.
That's just short of turning it off.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're right behind China.
Okay,
they're just coming at it from a slightly different perspective.
Can I ask an obvious question?
Yeah.
So how do you control that?
Well, this
how do you police that? It's like even South Africa's got a thing. It came out last year. It was about content producers. It's like if you're producing any kind of content, there's some digital board body thing, and it's like you've got to send all your legitimately. This is what the law says, that for all the content we produce for all of our clients, right, has to go to them first for approval. Do you know what's that? Do you know what it's called?
I don't know what it's called, but yeah.
It's a South African digital blah blah. Anyway, but it's like it's impossible to enforce that. It's like a directive rather than a guideline rather than a directive.
Not really, because we think that. I mean, we think that how can a government switch off the internet? But Zimbabwe managed to do that. I mean, I was surprised that they actually had the technological capability to actually switch off the whole internet for the whole country. But they could do that. But how they're planning to enforce this is by putting content into a massive database. I mean, the costs behind this must be insane. And this database is going to pretty much be a free for all. Anyone can register anything as copyright, and then you're like linked as the copyright owner. And then they're going to go to all the publishing platforms, like your WordPresses, and there's a whole lot of like the CRM platforms that a lot of the major publishers are using that'll be obligated to link to this. Okay. So there's going to be a few independent self-built blogs that are going to take a bit longer to get away with. But if you're using any of these well-known content management platforms, you're going to get a whole lot of pop-ups. So when you try to post your blog using the back end of the system, if you link to anything, that link is going to be automatically referenced to this copyright directive database through a pop-up type system. I mean, from what I've heard, it's going to be pretty awful, but they have a plan for this. Technically, it is possible. Like, you won't be able to actually hyperlink that link unless it says it's okay in that database.
So what if there's a dispute? Then who handles the millions of cases a year for dispute.
Well, maybe that's why Britain wants to leave the EU, because it's going to cost a lot. Politicians going to politic, right?
But that's retarded, man. Honestly, it's the most fucking stupid thing I've ever heard in my life.
It's either stupid or evil. I don't know.
Well, it's
either they don't know what they're doing.
Stupid.
Either they don't know what they're doing, and that's terrible enough, or they know exactly what they're doing, and that's more scary.
So I remember I was in London in '99, around about, for about 5-6 years, and you know the link, the link, like the thing that you're talking about, when you link to a thing, like that link itself. So the internet was literally like, it was the dot-com boom, and British Telecom, BT, lay claim to the link. They said that they had come up with the link.
Of course they did.
In other words, linking online information from together, essentially, the basic premise of how the internet's built. And they were like, well, we did this before the internet, or just after the internet, we were first. And they lost that because you can't copyright the fucking internet. Do you know what I'm saying? It's so imagine if all of us were having to pay British Telecom like 0.1 for every link that was ever created. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's impossible.
That's what this staff wants to do. It's quite something. Read it up. Like, I haven't met many people that have actually read it, but it's eye-opening. It's amazing.
So I want to dive more into the ethics side of things. I mean, we painted a pretty broad, ecosystem of legislators and big, governments and now businesses all trying to navigate this changing thing called the internet, and some succeeding and some not succeeding. So I guess where does one start actually when one says, okay, well, we want to be ethical in the pursuit of our profits? Where does one start? And if we can talk about it not in the sense of like governments and stuff, because we don't really give a shit.
Can't do much about that.
Yeah, but for business owners and for C-suites, a lot of who listen to the show, if they're thinking about ethics and the role that ethics plays in the culture of an organization to deliver a product, service, mission, vision, what have you, where does one start? Like, what are the first steps one should consider taking?
Well, hopefully, just like with most ethics, you don't do unto other people what you wouldn't want done to yourself. That's generally a good place to start. But the thing to realize is that if you are exposed, if your algorithm is exposed naked to the world and people see what you are doing with it, what data that you're collecting and how you are biasing your results according to certain people, or because that's actually quite an interesting thing to do. If everyone wants to open up Airbnb and have a look at a particular listing, you'll see all got different prices. Isn't that nice? So people are doing that. So you don't want to be, if you were then caught out, like someone actually saw that Airbnb is charging me an extra 20% for the same listing that they're charging you, would you be comfortable with that? Would you be cool with that information going out into the press? Because once you start crossing that line, once you are exposed, then the house of cards starts coming down. I mean, we've seen this with Facebook. Like, Facebook's not cool anymore. Facebook meddled with like one election, and now it's like uncool to be on Facebook. So that's going to happen. I mean, I think we've definitely seen peak Facebook. There's going to be something equally, if not more, awful and awesome at the same time coming up right behind it. But that's what happens. The bigger you are, the harder you fall. And when you get exposed, it gets really ugly. So if you would be comfortable showing your naked algorithm to the world, then you're probably starting from a fairly decent place.
Okay, so but how does one decide what's ethical and what's not? Because in the case of business, it's like you're the business that you are today, but there's also the business that you're becoming. And in order to address the pace of change, I mean, we do a lot of work for technology companies. And basically, it's like, well, the world is moving faster. Everybody agrees with that. Change is inevitable. So therefore, it's almost like saying, well, if we go with this set of values, right, we're going to go and operate as a company like this. We will always do this, this, and this in the pursuit of profit and growth, or whatever the case is. Like Amazon did. Like, they didn't take a profit. It was all about vision and growth. Everything was reinvested into the company, and they acquired, like, I don't know, so many companies. And so now they're this mammoth thing. But now, hypothetically speaking, the world changes, and now they need to address those things and change those things in order to manage that change and to still be relevant.
That's constantly going to happen. The average Fortune 500 company only lasts for 10 to 15 years now. That's the half-life of a listed company. That's really, really short. So there are these Darwinian events, and the dinosaurs do go extinct, and we see this. It just happens faster and faster and faster, and we tend to think of things like Google and Apple and Amazon as going to be around forever because they're so big, but they weren't around like 20 years ago. You know, what were they? They were fringy type things, and they're not going to be around in 20 years' time unless they have that agility to keep on changing along with the pace. But coming back to ethics and regulation, I think what's missing from the conversation is very much the consumer, because the consumer doesn't actually know what they're losing. They just see the shiny free Apple or the nice new Fitbit. They're not seeing the trade-off of what they're trading off for that. I mean, you don't honestly think that Discovery is losing money on your vitality points that you're getting back from it. You know, they're making more money than ever because they know more about you. People don't see that. Are we not seeing consumer voices in these laws that are going to start coming on board for technology? A big thing to realize about tech laws is that people build it and then ask for permission. You know, like, don't ask for permission or just ask for forgiveness later down the line.
Preach.
That's what happened with technology, and that's great. I mean, I'm all about the free market, so people need to do that. That means legislators are kind of limping along behind them, and consumers are clueless on the side, like not even knowing what's being legislated. So there's not enough people in the room, in the conversation. Looking at something like robot rights is also great as an example there, where we see things like self-driving cars. So now the self-driving car community, like your Elon Musk and co, I don't know if it's in particular, but I definitely know that autonomous car makers are saying, no, robots need to have rights. That's not to say that they want robots to be your friends. They're saying robots need to have rights in the same way a company has rights, legal rights. In other words, that the robot or the autonomous algorithm even then becomes an intellectual and a business person. And that means that responsibilities can be transferred from the person who built the robot or the algorithm, or the business that bought the algorithm that is only hiring white 40-year-old men, like Amazon was caught doing like a while back where their HR algorithm was biased. That responsibility can be transferred to the machine. Oh, the bot did it. It wasn't me. It was the bot. Mm-hmm. You know, that's great.
It's a whole other can of problems.
But the reason those laws are going to get passed is because the only person having the conversation is the company that owns that technology. They're going to the government and saying, oh no, we need to give robots rights. And they're coming up with their own story. And that point of view is being pushed through. Legislators are not experts in this, and they're less affected by it than the end user that could be hit by the self-driving car. I mean, they've already killed 4 or 5 people, right? So, you know, these are things that are becoming a concern to individuals, but the individuals aren't included in that conversation. And you're not going to be invited to that table. People have to invite themselves, and younger generations are very outspoken about everything to do with sexism and racism and politics and all the rest of it. Why aren't we also speaking about these issues from a point of view of our own agency?
But it's interesting, right? Because it's like, if you're going to be on the internet, you don't have freedom.
Correct.
You don't. Because it's like, well, I'm going to use Facebook today, or I'm going to use Google, I'm going to use YouTube, and literally everything that you're doing is being tracked.
Yeah, if it's free, you're trading it for freedom. You know, that's
so it's
really
like the only choice you have is to not be on the internet. That's not exactly an exciting place to be.
No, but there are people trying to build alternative internets, like the blockchain internets that are all about privacy. Hopefully they come on board. And if things like the EU copyright directive come into play, the internet's going to be a pretty sucky place to be anyway. So you're going to want to be on the less secure dark web might become the main web, which is quite interesting. That could be a future scenario that we could see playing out.
Yeah. I mean, this robot thing is also very interesting, right? I mean, it's a very real thing. I mean, business automation, you'll know, is a huge trend around the world. AI obviously as a technology in and of itself, blockchain less so now, but still promises so much. I mean, you say that, well, consumers should be part of this conversation, but how the hell do you do that? Is it as simple as like tweeting about it? Or,
well, it's a good start, actually. If more people know about what the questions are, more people can put their own opinions onto the tables. I mean, we're not going to agree with each other, but it's just the same people talking about this in and amongst themselves. You've got some philosophers in very academic departments and sort of little silos around the world, and you've got the tech community, and you've got the EU that are really talking about this. There's definitely room for more voices at the table. I don't have the answers of how to get people to that table, but like most things in this world, you invite yourself, right?
But where has it happened before? If you're looking in the context of internet policy and regulation or what have you, where has it happened before that a bunch of consumers, individuals got together and affected change? Have you seen anything?
They haven't done that. That's the thing. The one glimmer of hope there, I would say, is here in South Africa. The blockchain independent consumer layman community has been instrumental in getting themselves in front of the Reserve Bank to lead that conversation into how cryptocurrency is regulated. So it is possible. I mean, they just like a bunch of guys that got together for meetups and they were like, oh, actually, maybe instead of waiting for the Reserve Bank to come up with some daft law, we can actually lead that process. And the bank's been very receptive to them, I have to say. They've done a pretty good job of listening to those stakeholders. So people are willing to listen if you're willing to talk, but you have to actually get out and learn about this stuff.
It's funny, I was talking to Lauren Gamaroff this morning about that, and we're talking about regulation and adoption of Bitcoin specifically in Africa. And I said to him, what's actually going on in the regulation space? I mean, if you're talking about these kind of disruptive technologies, which, by the way, need regulation in order for the things to scale and to be widely adopted in a consistent fashion. Hey, how about my chair? I've just halved in size.
Should I join you down there?
No, you stay right where you are. That was embarrassing. God damn it. Anyway, but he was saying, like, to your point, it was the community of influencers that got together and defined a framework that is largely, as far as Lauren is concerned anyway, is actually world-class leading.
Absolutely. From what I've seen too, I think they've done a very good job.
Okay, so where do we go from here? What else do we need to know about ethics?
I think the other thing that people might be interested in is that whole concept of how algorithms are increasingly ruling our lives, even if it's not through top-down approach like the China dystopia. We can leave that alone for a moment. But to look at how algorithms are increasingly making the decisions for us and what happens to us. So like I was saying, if you go onto Airbnb and I go onto Airbnb, we're going to get different prices. I don't know if you know that MasterCard has developed software that can tell how fat you are.
What?
Yeah, based on your purchases. You're not spending enough on running shoes. You're spending far too much on McDonald's. You're definitely fat. So they've created an algorithm that's surprisingly accurate that can tell what your weight is. And they propose selling this to airlines. So in other words, the airline, when you go and look for a flight to go on your holiday to Mauritius this year, the airline will get check from MasterCard. Oh no, MasterCard says this guy's probably overweight. So the airline can just automatically load an extra pricing onto you, whereas your brother, who has definitely spent more at the health food store, gets a lower price.
So wrong.
But you would never know you were being price discriminated against. But that's just one example. And I don't think the airlines are actually using it, but MasterCard has said it's possible. MIT's made ones that can tell if you're gay or not by looking at your profile picture. Also very accurate. That's funny in South Africa. It's not funny if you live in a Muslim country where you can get hung for that. That's not funny. So you see, that's why it becomes very serious. These algorithms are starting to rule different parts of our lives. It could be a case of trying to apply for credit for a house, and there's an algorithm that's decided that people with the name Sarah, statistically, randomly enough, don't pay their loans back, and your name's Sarah, but you actually have very good credit risk. This algorithm might deny you a loan, and you will never know why you're being denied that. Because there's not that transparency. And that's why if we're going to be pushing for anything, we should be pushing for transparency as to how decisions are made. So at least if you know, it's denying me because I'm Sarah, I know I need to weight up some other criteria in order to get myself through that system. And we've seen that even with like education and teacher scoring in the US, where teachers their bonuses are linked to their performance, but the performance is linked to an opaque algorithm. So like you might have the brightest students in your class with the best grade, but you marked as being a bad teacher because the algorithm was actually not rating the overall performance of your class, but rather the difference between the grades from last year to the grades till the end of your class year, for example. But it's this transparency that becomes a problem because these things are going to be making so many decisions for us in the private sector.
Yeah, that's scary. Yeah. There was a Massmart example. I think there was this mom gets a ring at a doorbell. Target. Sorry. So she opens the door and there's a delivery, and then they're like, "What the hell is this? We didn't order anything." And like they legitimately hadn't ordered anything. And then the mom like opens this up, and it's a pregnancy test. And it was basically what happened. There was like a data thing, and they knew that the daughter was pregnant or possibly pregnant. Yeah. And so based on her shopping behavior, and so they sent this thing as like
they sent a baby care package.
Was it a baby
new expectant moms? Yeah, brilliant, right? They know so much.
Imagine
about
that. Hey?
Hi, mom.
Holy shit. Yeah.
Yeah. Target knows before the dad does. I mean, that's terrible.
Ain't gonna be no fucking tonight.
But anyway, these sort of things are going to be controlling more parts of our lives, and they probably are already. There are probably ways that you're being discriminated against you don't know. And, it's illegal to discriminate against someone based on the color of their skin or their sex or gender. But if the algorithm does it, you can get away with a whole lot.
But the irony, though, is that you don't have control over any of
And you
this.
don't know about it.
And equally so. So it's like, where does the buck stop? Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, I think the only thing that you can do as a consumer is to become aware of what's going on.
To demand answers to your questions and to ask, how is this price calculated? And to when your best friend gets quoted a different price on Airbnb or on an airline than you do, to put that out there, to show people, to go to your local newspaper and say why, be that guy, because that's sort of asking those questions helps us to design better bots. I mean, these are all tools that are supposed to make our lives better, not worse. But when they're controlled by very, very few people and no one's asking questions about them, of course they're going to run amok. But that's what the free market's about. You got to have pushback. Consumer ultimately dictates who wins in a market. So if you don't support people who are not playing by the nice rules, they will change. That's just what will happen.
I think brands have a really big opportunity to capitalize on this whole thing also, which is to basically say, okay, here's what's the term? It's like a social tension or something like that. And to literally take a position, which is kind of what Nike did with
brand activism,
and actually say, okay, we cool with this. We got a whole campaign with gay men and women, whatever the case is. Or whatever it might be, like the Colin Kaepernick thing that Nike piggybacked on. I mean, there's a huge opportunity for brands to actually build their brand and build liquidity and build relationships, because the convention here is that very few businesses are actually standing up and going, well, we won't do that. And they don't do that because, as we touched on right in the beginning, they're motivated by profit because they have shareholders. So it's in their interest to build AI and use data and to become more efficient and to become more productive and to adopt business automation, to work with robots in the pursuit of the bottom line. So for a brand then in that context to go, well, actually, hey, we're going to do this thing, and that's super disruptive in and of itself. Like, what are some practical ways that brands could potentially capitalize on that space?
From the data space, I don't have too many good examples of brands that are using data for awesome, because as I said, it's not like we really know how most of these things work. But there definitely are people that are looking at ways in order to cut down on bias. Like MIT put together something called the WebTap project, which means you can run your algorithm through their little piece of code they did. And what they did is they've made tons of fake profiles of people of every sort of demographic and every kind of combination. And they'll give you a report and say, your bot is biased. Your bot does not like Hispanic gentlemen between the ages of 23 and 25. Fix that. So there are ways you can fix your stuff. And honestly, the way we see now food packages like organic certified eggs, we need like the organic version of the internet. I read that on someone's Twitter yesterday, and I think it's nauseating, but it's kind of funny and it does get the points across. We need like the organic internet. This bot is certified unbiased. Like a consumer organization could do that. There's a business opportunity for someone listening out there. Like certified bots is clean and green.
This is a sustainable bot.
Correct. Yes, a sustainable good bot.
That's hilarious. Thinking. Cool. Let's play a game of Injustice League. And so this is where we're going to ask you to smash some stuff in the studio. But I know you asked me what the baseball bats were for. Oh. And then we're going to get into some rapid fire questions. So, what is one injustice that you see in the world that needs to be either changed or stopped completely?
Oh, wow. So many. I can't remember what I told you when I filled out the questionnaire, but no, I think for me, the biggest injustice is the way that corporations get special treatment from government as opposed to individuals. So I think the whole crony capitalism thing is definitely a massive injustice, and it comes back to businesses partnering with governments and basically selling their consumers out. I think that's pretty gross. That your tax-paying money is being used to screw yourself over.
What was it? Was it robots, Mav? Was it? What was it? People being governed by machines.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It goes in line.
Because you have a robot here.
We were talking about the biased bots and how increasingly as the future goes along, privileged people, rich people, can still be processed by a human being because you got a connection at Barclays and you can get a job there one day. Whereas the masses or poor people that don't have connections will be increasingly processed by machines that might be biased. So, if you don't have any connection at a bank and you want a job there, you send your application off, it's screened by a bot and you're just shuffled away like that. So the privilege of personal connection is quite sad.
It is. So with that in mind, you can put your mic down. I'm going to step out of the way here. And then you can pick up a baseball bat. We have 2. So that you'll notice that they've been signed by previous Injustice League graduates. And then, when you're ready, just have a whirl. Okay, off you go. 1, 2, 3. That was... It is dead. You'll notice the robot is indestructible. That was great. There you go. Cool. So, just with your trend cap on, what motivates you to research this stuff? Like, what motivates you to continue to understand how the world is evolving and to report that information back?
Well, that's easy. That's because the world always is evolving. So you can either be passively swept away across the tides, or you can try and actually divert that tide. That's really the only 2 choices. There's people that get carried away, and there's people that do the next thing. You got Elon Musk's, and you got people who voted for Trump.
Yeah. Trends change so quickly. How does one stay abreast of them?
Well, you got to keep reading and learning. I read a lot. I read an awful lot. I mean, that's pretty much the quickest way to get information into your brain until Elon does come up with his brain chips through Neuralink that can just program information directly into your skull. You honestly can't keep on top of information by listening to podcasts only or watching video, because you just can't get that amount of information into your brain. You can get through many more words if you read. So I'd say read a lot.
If you're looking at sources of information, so I believe in this whole concept called triangulation. So if someone's saying something, reference that in 2 other sources, get 2 other sources to say something similar or the same thing. What systems or approaches can, C-suite people, entrepreneurs use to get to the truth of potentially what might be actually moving and happening in a particular market?
Okay, well, we always start with, at Flux, our methodology is very much we observe things. So we just look at what's going on the internet, what's trending on Twitter, what are people writing about, what are people interested in, just from a very broad perspective. And then you kind of form a hypothesis and you say, oh, okay, maybe brand activism is a big trend for 2018. But then you go out and find the resources to back up that point of view or to contradict it, because sometimes you might find that you're actually completely wrong. People might be tweeting about one thing, but they're not doing that in real life. So we back that up with quantitative research with our research partners if we really want to get to the gist of a particular question that we might have. And we do a lot of face-to-face conversations too, because you learn a lot from people subtly just by listening to what they say and what they don't have to say. But it really is about being, what does Malcolm Gladwell say? The people that will succeed in the future will be mystery solvers, not just puzzle builders, because you've got to we have a problem with too much information, not too little information, and you've got to crack down on that to get to that actual solution, like Sherlock Holmes says.
Exactly. You're doing a lot of speaking. So this episode's proudly brought to you by Unique Speaker Bureau. What talks are you currently offering in this space?
Well, I have a talk about what we discussed today about Don't Be Evil and about how to be a good Big Brother brand. So we can look at that. But I've also spent a lot of time last year looking at transhumanism and the future of literally humanity in terms of our bodies as we start integrating with machines, and how people are becoming more machine-like by integrating more and more technology into our bodies, and about how at the same time machines are becoming more humanoid and having things like even potentially emergent consciousness within a few years or so. So that's quite interesting if you're interested in tech, but that does come back to business, and that we look at that from a future of work perspective to see how can you train your cyborgs, what the talk's called. So it's like, how do you work with humans that are being managed increasingly by machines, and how do you manage a team that is now starting to incorporate technology as essentially a cobot or a colleague in that
organization? How do you train your robo-dog?
With great difficulty. I have one of those. They are not easy.
What does the future of humanity look like in that space? Are we going to become cyborgs, upload our brains into like some form of simulation, download into like a, cyborg type thing? Like what are your thinking there? What have you observed? Well,
those are the extremes. The extreme things are saying you achieve immortality by literally uploading your consciousness into the cloud, and then you can live on forever as a disembodied computer brain. That's not a particularly exciting future for me, but it could theoretically be possible within a few decades or a century or two, because mapping the connectome is quite a big deal. We're all very unique. 30% of our brain connections are unique to each of us, so it won't come cheap either. But I think what's more likely is this whole cyborg the cyborg of humanity, and that we are going to be integrating more and more technology with our physical bodies. And that scares people until you start to think about things like pacemakers and hearing aids and contact lenses. Those are all technologies we already have embodied in our bodies, and we're going to see more and more of that. That's going to keep us alive for longer. I don't think we really are going to achieve immortality quite soon, as much as Singularity University preaches live forever. It's more likely that we're going to just live longer lives, and that it's going to have huge economic implications for societies, especially a society that wants to implement a universal basic income. And now you've got 70-year-olds that retire and live to 150, because that is feasible within a generation or two. And they're just taking from the fiscus. They're not contributing to that. How do you sustainably look after that sort of population? Are quite big conversations to be had with leaders and governments.
Bronwyn, let's wrap this up. Why do you do what you do? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
I'm just insatiably curious. I'm a know-it-all, and I want to know all the things. Those are my hashtags. Read all the books, know all the things. So,
Bronwyn, it's been an absolute privilege and honor having this chat. I think it's been really awesome. Just great chat. And hopefully our listeners and viewers out there, thank you for tuning in, our live audience. And let's see what the hell happens in the space.
absolutely.
Round of applause, Bronwyn.
Thank